Dean McKee, now 46, hasn't been free for 30 years. In 1988, he was convicted for the murder of a 41-year-old homeless man named Isaiah Walker. Walker was killed because he was black. Back then, McKee was a self-proclaimed neo-Nazi skinhead. Today, McKee says he is a changed man.
So overwhelmed, and it's been a long road, and I've just some wonderful people kept me strong and kept me focused, and you know, when you open your heart, some amazing things happen. I'm grateful and I'm blessed.
All right. Hola, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Convoluted. I'm Jesse Asher, and today we're going to talk about a wrongfully convicted Florida man who spent 30 years in prison for a murder that he did not commit. And I'm sorry in advance if I sound a little ill. It's because I am. I'm fighting some allergies right now. It's warming up in Florida, so everything's attacking me. And I also got sunburnt today golfing with my brother, so sorry if I look a little red. It was in the early hours of Sunday morning, December 20th, 1987, when the two brothers, Dean McKee, 16, and Scott McKee, who was 18 at the time, and two of their friends left Ybor City near downtown Tampa from a night of just hanging out, drinking, going to bars and clubs or whatever, and they were heading home. So once on the road, it was reported that Scott was driving erratically, and everyone else in the car told him that he needed to pull over. However, I also heard that they pulled over to relieve themselves from all the drinking, but at that point doesn't really matter too much. But the point is that they pulled over because for some reason they needed to. According to my sources, Dean and Scott got into a brawl with Isaiah Walker at the Tampa Art Museum, which is downtown. And what's reported is that a security guard heard some sounds of fighting or like shuffling and whatnot and came across a dying Isaiah Walker, in which of course he alerted the police. I got a note here because it is important. Isaiah Walker was a black man, and Dean and Scott, the two brothers, they were neo-Nazis at the time. Isaiah Walker was a 41-year-old Vietnam war vet who was actually a recipient of Purple Heart from Vietnam, but he was homeless at the time. So he was just trying to go to sleep at the Tampa Art Museum, basically on the balcony somewhere. And when they pulled off, they walked around there and found him. Now, once the police arrived at the scene, they found Walker badly beaten, and they also found a bloody fishing lead sinker nearby, but they saw no signs of any perpetrators nearby. Everybody had left by that point. And Walker had suffered multiple blows to the head, and the autopsy later showed that he had suffered a stab wound to the heart as well. So I do want to also point out the fact that there was another suspect that the defense had suggested. It was another homeless man by the name of Theodis Davis. I'm sorry if I'm saying that wrong. I don't know how to pronounce that name, but it's Theotis Davis. Sometime after the attack, police confronted Davis by the museum, and he had blood on his clothes and a bag with fishing equipment inside, which was suspicious because of that bloody lead sinker that they found near Mr. Walker's body. Also, apparently the blood found on the clothing did match the blood type of Mr. Walker, but I honestly don't know where that led, or if they decided to pursue that homeless man anymore, Mr. Davis, because I didn't find much else about it. It kind of just seemed like it died off. And it went nowhere for a few months, but in March of 1988, when Dean's stepfather, Lowell McKee, he called the police claiming that Dean had something to do with the death of Isaiah Walker. And of course, the police followed up on that. So on March 4th, 1988, police went to the McKee residence and they interviewed Lowell and Scott. And later that day, the police arrested both Dean, the 16-year-old brother, and Scott, the 18-year-old brother, and they charged them both with first-degree murder. Scott would end up with a 5-year sentence after reaching an agreement with the prosecutors to testify against Dean. And on June 13th, 1988, Dean went to trial in the Hillsborough County Circuit Court. So there was really no physical evidence that tied Dean to the murder of Isaiah Walker. It pretty much all relied on witness testimonies. And there was a little bit of evidence with a knife, but we'll get into that. But for the most part, it was just witness testimony. So of all the witnesses, Scott, his older brother, his testimony was by far the most influential and on the final decision for what happened with Dean. Scott testified that after pulling over and stumbling upon Isaiah Walker, Dean was in fact the one who had stabbed him. And although Scott did admit to taking part in the beating of Isaiah Walker, according to the National Registry of Exonerations, he said that he told Dean that, quote, this man had had enough, unquote, and he hurried back to the truck. Scott stated that Dean got to the truck after him, holding a bloody knife, saying, quote, I think I stabbed a man, unquote. The knife was seized from Scott's room, and it was used as evidence. And though Scott McKee, he testified he recognized the knife as one of his work knives, or his main work knife, he claimed that Dean actually had the knife in his possession and had probably given it back to him sometime between January and March. So another person that testified was 17-year-old Bobby Hoos. He testified against Dean, telling the court that Dean had told him a few days after the incident that he had gotten into a fight and killed a man. And Lowell McKee also testified about the phone conversation that he had with Dean when Dean supposedly admitted to stabbing a man. But, and that's a big but, Lowell claimed during cross-examination that he was pressured to testify by the prosecution. And another witness, 17-year-old Eric Tolpo? I think I'm hopefully pronouncing that correctly. He knew both of the brothers, and he testified that Dean had also bragged to him about killing a man. However, another big however, during cross-examination, Eric also recanted his testimony, stating that it was false and he was just saying what the prosecution told him to say under threat. And we're going to bounce to another witness, Victoria Smith, who was the fourth person that was out with Dean and Scott that night partying in Ybor City. And she testified that she saw Scott holding the bloody knife at the scene. And most of this right now is according to the National Registry of Exonerations. Another man, this is what, like the fifth witness? David McClinch testified that Scott told him that he took care of Walker, which he believes meant that Scott had done the stabbing. According to the Tampa Bay Times, friends said that Scott McKee was a violent man or a violent teen, and he was known to carry around one of those lead sinkers, those fishing sinkers. It was tied to a piece of line to use as a weapon. That other witness, Bobby Hoos, he testified in the year 2000. He testified that his testimony was actually false and was a result of coercion by the prosecution. In the defense, they pretty much argued that Dean was getting set up by his brother and father to take the fall because the belief was that since he was 16, he was going to get a lighter sentence, and since Scott was 18, he would probably receive a harsher sentence. But as we know, that was not the case, and Dean was actually charged as an adult. So on June 17, 1988, the jury found Dean McKee guilty of first-degree murder, and he was sentenced to life with a minimum of 25 years. The Florida 2nd District Court of Appeals upheld his conviction in the year 1990, and for the next 16 years, Dean would file many post-conviction motions for a new trial, but they all failed. And some of these petitions, they were based on the recantation of Bobby Hoos, that one witness. And it kind of seemed to be hopeless for quite some time until the year 2007 when Dean filed a motion for requesting DNA testing. And the Tampa Police Department was then required to submit all the evidence to the Florida Department of Law Enforcement for DNA testing. But the order did not call for a sample of Dean's DNA for comparison. And I honestly don't know why that wouldn't be included. That's beyond me, but it just seems weird that they would grant his motion for DNA testing but not get a sample of his to compare it. DNA testing was done on multiple items, and Dean had filed multiple motions in order to get his DNA collected so they could compare it. And in December 2010, he was denied. Luckily, the Florida Innocence Project, they stepped in to take control of that whole DNA issue. Seth Miller of the Florida Innocence Project, he took over the case in January 2011, and he immediately moved for reconsideration of the denial and of that DNA comparison testing. And just a couple months later, the request was granted. On April 15, 2011, the Florida Department of Law Enforcement issued an amended report stating that Dean was not a contributor to the DNA found under Mr. Walker's fingernails and that bloody lead fishing sinker that they found near his body. And because of that DNA testing, Seth Miller filed a post-conviction motion to vacate Dean's case in April of 2013. That wasn't the only thing that actually was going in his favor at this point. See, in 2014 and 15, evidentiary hearings began, and at this point, we know Dean McKee was not a contributor to the DNA that they collected and tested from under Mr. Walker's fingers. And in fact, evidence. During these hearings, they had a few people testify both in Dean's favor and implicating Scott as the guilty one. They testified that Scott McKee had admitted to throwing Dean under the bus for something that he actually did himself. So according to the Tampa Bay Times, an ex-girlfriend of Scott McKee, she testified that she was with the McKee brothers that night, and she spoke of Dean actually pulling Scott off of Mr. Walker. She also claimed that Scott had told her that he and his father planned to let Dean take the fall, assuming that he would get the lighter sentence for being a juvenile. And Scott was actually called as a witness in the hearings, but he denied to testify, invoking his Fifth Amendment rights. On October 2017, Dean's conviction and sentence was officially vacated and granted by the Hillsborough County Circuit Court Judge Lisa Campbell. The prosecution appealed the ruling, of course, and like a month later, but in January of 2018, Dean was actually released from prison on bond after serving 30 years behind bars. And then in January of 2019, they dismissed the case entirely. And according to the Tampa Bay Times, quote, the Hillsborough State Attorney determined it lacked the evidence to proceed to a new trial. And thanks to the efforts of the Florida Innocence Project, Dean's determination for the truth, Dean is now living a free life with his wife in Florida, and he's got his own tattoo shop and just doing what he should have been able to do all those years, and that's just build himself a life. So while in prison, Dean actually changed quite a bit. He disavowed white supremacy, he got his GED, he took part in many educational programs and courses. He apparently just spent a lot of his time, creating art and working on art and waiting for his chance of freedom that he deserved, because he was not guilty of this crime. I want to thank you guys for watching to the end of this video. I'm sorry if I sound a little sick. Make sure to do the follow, subscribe, like, comment, all that stuff to help the algorithm, and stay tuned for more episodes of Convoluted. But most importantly, I want you to take some time to check out the Florida Innocence Project. I will provide a link right below with all my other sources. And if you are able to donate, if you live in Florida, you could always volunteer to help out and just raise awareness. That's probably, the biggest thing you can do if you can't donate. Make sure to check out the National Exoneration Registry, which I will also link below. And every source that I used will be linked below. So thank you guys, and stay tuned for more episodes. I'm out.